Hello, my name is Caretakers, and I am the founder and executive director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. My role here today is to welcome you and introduce our speakers, and then to thank them at the end. This Indigenous water ethics traditional dialogue is the idea and vision of Mona Polacca, who is the senior fellow for the Original Caretakers program at Center for Earth Ethics. I will introduce Mona in a more full way in a moment, and you will know why we feel so honored to have her in this role with the center. But I also want to say a word about the Original Caretakers program. It seeks to honor, support, collaborate with, and learn from Indigenous traditions. The Original Caretakers program is interconnected with all the other work we do at the Center for Earth Ethics because we feel that Indigenous wisdom is critical to our mission, which is to discern and pursue the changes that are necessary, the changes in both culture and policy that are necessary to change our collective value system away from one that is based on short-term monetary gain, no matter the pollution, the depletion, or the inequity, and towards a value system that perceives and measures value according to the long-term health of the whole community of life. Or as the great Onondaga faith keeper Oren Lyons says in just 4 words, value change for survival. The Original Caretakers program has been a cornerstone of the Center for Earth Ethics since the time that it began, just about 6 years ago. In fact, it was a force that brought us into existence. We're honored to be supporting this traditional dialogue on Indigenous water ethics. And actually, also right here in the beginning, the Center for Earth Ethics wants to take a moment to give our thanks to all those Native water protectors who are out there right now around the world, some of whom give their livelihoods and even their lives for this essential work that all life on Earth and all of us benefit from. Water is fundamental to all life. Protecting water is essential for ecosystem restoration, biodiversity, food justice, and calming the climate crisis. And as we seek, as a global community, as we seek to build frameworks for regenerative systems, Indigenous peoples really deserve a place in the center of that. Indigenous peoples who already safeguard water and who hold the ancestral knowledge and cultural practices that are necessary to ground and support that work. We want to acknowledge that this dialogue is happening at a special time in human history, a time when many people are coming to awareness about the powerful knowledge of Indigenous peoples and the truth about what has happened to them and to their cultures. In just a few days from now, we in the United States of America have a holiday that encapsulates this transformative time. It was named for a famous leader of European conquest, so-called, but it is becoming known as Indigenous Peoples Day. So we feel also that it is very significant to convene this traditional dialogue at this time, a few days before Indigenous Peoples Day. And we're grateful to all of those who've agreed to join us and share their knowledge. And I will introduce them now. Mona Polacca is the senior fellow for the Original Caretakers program at the Center for Earth Ethics. She's also an educator and facilitator whose knowledge, empathy, and values motivate others to speak and act. She has a master's degree in social work. She has a special interest in older people and youth, and has led or participated in many effective initiatives related to Indigenous water issues. And she's also worked on culturally appropriate health treatments for Native peoples. Mona is a longtime active participant in the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and has been invited to speak in many global forums and assist in drafting declarations, including for the Indigenous World Forum on Water and Peace. Her efforts have also included providing support to First Nations to build capacity to take action on climate change, to build sustainable communities, protect land and water, and conserve biodiversity. Rawiri Tinarau is of Te Ati Hanui a Paparangi descent and has genealogical connections to several hapu, which are extended family groupings, and iwi, which are collections of hapu. who have connections with and interests in the Whanganui River. He is director of Te Atawai o Te Ao, a Maori research institute focused on health and environmental research, as well as deputy chair of Nga Tangata Tiaki o Whanganui, the post-settlement governance entity for the Whanganui River settlement. Rawiri serves on a number of governance and advisory boards and has several interests, including Maori community development, performing arts, education, and Maori business and economic development. In his spare time, he likes to spend time in and on the Whanganui River. Austin Nunez is the chairman of the San Xavier District of the Tohono O'odham Nation, located in the arid Sonoran Desert region of southwestern Arizona, with a population of 2,300. He will present a case study about a 23-year legal challenge to regain his tribe's inherent water rights. And here I'd like to quote from Austin Nunez about this. Our once flowing river and underground water sources for the land base of our 27,000 acre reservation were compromised due to the overpumping of our aquifer by the non-Indigenous settlers as they started to drill groundwater wells beginning in the late 1800s. The challenge started in 1975, and in the end, an out-of-court settlement was reached, granting us 50,000 acre feet per year of the Colorado River via an approximately 30-mile pipeline and 10,000 acre feet of natural groundwater per year, and were awarded a cash settlement to rehabilitate our farm. Our story needs to be told to provide lessons learned and distill hope in other similarly situated Indigenous communities throughout the world. And finally, we have Gyan Khaya, Betty Lyons of the Onondaga Nation and the Snipe Clan. Betty is the executive director of the American Indian Law Alliance. She's an Indigenous and environmental activist and citizen of the Onondaga Nation. She serves as a member of the Haudenosaunee External Relations Committee and has been an active participant at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues since the first session in 2001 as a delegate of the Onondaga Nation. Betty continues to work for the protection of Indigenous peoples who are fighting to protect traditions, territories, resources, and also to care for Mother Earth. Out of her concern for Indigenous peoples and Mother Earth, Betty serves on numerous boards like the Future Foundation, Connie Hogarth Center, Center for Earth Ethics, the Most Skanon Great Law of Peace Center Academic Collaborative. And we at the Center for Earth Ethics are especially honored that she is the co-chair of our advisory board, and we are grateful for all the time and care she has given to us to help us be who we are as a center. So thank you all again for being present. Please forgive anything I mispronounced. And for those in the audience, I want to note that the chat will be open for you to post observations, thoughts, and any questions that may come up for you during this dialogue. But we will not be answering questions. The speakers will not be answering questions in the chat because this is a traditional dialogue. And to explain a little bit more about this and more, I now present Mona Polacca.
First of all, I'd like to greet each and every one of you and thank you for your time and your presence joining us here today for this water ethics, a traditional dialogue. And we are representatives of various Indigenous peoples that have come together to share our understanding and some of the work that has been done among Indigenous people to uphold the ethics. And in the traditional ethics, it's something that's not new. The terminology is new because in our Indigenous ways of being, we have what are called original instructions. And these are instructions that we as Indigenous people have been given from time immemorial. Our ancestors were given these instructions when we say we came into this world. And those instructions are instructions about how to live, how to be in balance and harmony with this divine creation, our mother, the earth, the sacred foundations of life, the water, the air, the fire, all of these things that give us our life. We were given instructions on how to stay in balance with it because that it is life. And we believe that these instructions have been what have sustained us, how that we have lived sustainably by following these instructions. And the reason why it's important to talk about these instructions as ethics is because that's basically what it is in our understanding. It's our way of being, uh, having this relationship and honoring and respecting it and having principles of ways of taking care of it and preserving and protecting these divine elements. And in particular, we're going to be talking about water today. And I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge all of the Indigenous people, the land where I'm speaking from, the place where I live in Tucson, Arizona, the original peoples of the ancestry of the Tohono O'odham Nation, and also give acknowledgement to my own people, my mother's people, the Havasupai, the people of the Blue Green Water, the Hopi and the Tewa Pueblos of northern Arizona. And then also acknowledge my panelists here today and give thanks for their presence and taking time out from their everyday life and their busy schedules to share their knowledge, their experience, and also to have dialogue among ourselves to address this very important issue. I was told by my relatives and my mother and my Hopi grandmother that that whenever I come upon water, I am supposed to acknowledge it and pay respect to it. I don't just rush right into it and jump in or take water from it or throw anything into it. My instructions were that I introduce myself to it. And so that's a practice that I do. My instructions were given to me by my Hopi elders that whenever I am making a prayer with the water, that I'm to go ahead and take some of that water and sprinkle it in the direction of my Hopi nation, the Hopi land, sprinkle it in that direction with a thought and a prayer and that feeling of love for them, that I offer this water in their direction so that the rains will go there and bless their gardens so they could have their gardens grow and provide them with food. And those are some of the basic instructions that I've been given and practice in my everyday life. We were born as people to care. From the first moment of our lives, we were seeking this connection. We seek this connection of the embrace and the warmth and the nourishment that we receive from our mother and from our family members that held us and gave us that sacred connection about life. And in that way, we develop this value of loving and being loved. And we find comfort in that. But it's also then we have a connection with all other things in life, the plant life, the water life. We have our connection to it. And each one of us, wherever we are geographically, there are these food sources that we receive from the land, from Mother Earth. And so there's this cycle that's important in our existence, in our relationship with the waters of that land and our identity as well. Many tribal nations identify themselves with the waters. I identify myself from the water I come from. I come from the water, the blue-green waters of the Grand Canyon. That's my mother's people. I come from the water. I'm a water clan. I come from the Colorado River. That's my identity as far as the water is concerned and my relationship with it. And so we connect with that water. And I like for you to think about your connection with the waters. Where are you? What waters do you come from? Where do you live? Where were you born? And the waters that were there. Think about these things while we go ahead and share our thoughts and our presentations here today. There are certain things that that are important right now, and it's important to understand that many times our Indigenous people are standing in places such as the court systems, which have are not familiar with what we consider our ethics. And so we have all of these considerations that have to do with our rights to water, our rights to the way that the water is being used, our rights to make sure, as part of our original instruction, to see that the water is kept safe and clean, not only for us today, but for the future generations to come. This is what I have to share to you right now at this time, and go ahead and turn it over to our speaker, Rawidi Kinearu.
Thank you, Mona, for the introduction, and greetings to everybody who has joined our session. Greetings from Aotearoa from New Zealand, and in particular from Whanganui, our ancestral river. This particular presentation speaks to some of the trials and tribulations experienced by my iwi, or tribal nation, with regard to our river. And I have to agree with Mona around our connection to water is extremely important for Indigenous peoples, and for our tribal nation, we not only belong to the river, but our tribal name comes from the river also. So yeah, I'll just kick into the presentation, and hopefully I can keep within the allocated time. So just as an overview to the presentation, I'll be firstly giving some of the background to the origin of our river, and then going into a little bit of detail around our river claim. But I think that the most important thing for us is some of the elements that are included within our river settlement before wrapping up my presentation. Here's a shot of our river taken from my particular homestead, which is in the middle reaches of the Whanganui River. When you wake up to this view every day, you're reminded that not only are we interconnected with all those that live along this particular river system, but that we belong to the river itself. So the Whanganui River is the most navigable and third longest of our rivers in Aotearoa in New Zealand. It has a huge catchment area and begins on the northern slopes of Mount Tongariro. It sort of flows northwest and then ends up in the sea down at the city, which is also named after the river, Whanganui. And within that whole river catchment area, there are several iwi, or tribal nations, that live, or traditionally lived, along its banks. So just a little bit of the origins of our river, of Te Awa Tupua. Te Awa Tupua is a term that talks about the supernatural powers of this particular river system. We have our ancestor Maui, who was responsible for fishing up the land from the ocean floor, and it was as a result of this fishing of this great land that the Sky Father gave a mountain called Ruapehu to sort of help calm this fish. But he also cried 2 tears, and one of which became our particular river, Te Awa Tupua, or the Whanganui River. And over time, other mountains and waterways were created. But in terms of our ancestral links, we have 3 sort of primal ancestors, Ruatipua and Pairangi, and then later on Honuiapa Parangi, which is another name for our tribal nation. So in terms of this particular river system, we view the river and its waters as our ancestor, as a provider of sustenance, of food, as our spiritual source as well. It's a place where we pray, where we go to in times of illness. It was the way that we traveled. It was our highway. For our children, it's their playground, and it became a place where over 200 settlements were established. And there's just a point there that I want to share, is that a sophisticated system of protocols was developed over several generations with regard to asking the river to provide for our needs. And so, you know, when Mona talks about those original instructions, for us, we also developed protocols which were in keeping with those original instructions, but also took cognizance of some of the changes that were happening. And those are the things that we need to continue to review and refine, given issues such as climate change. With regard to the claim on the river, from 1883 right through to the 2000s, we see that there is a clear sort of timeline of our petitions to not only the New Zealand government, but also using the court system to raise our particular concerns. The petitions in those 1880s were around the destruction of eel and fishing weirs to enable boats and others to be able to navigate the Whanganui River. However, those eel and fishing weirs were really important for our people, because not only was it a way of feeding our people, but it was a way of also holding on to those traditional works of our ancestors. So you can see that it's a very long litigious process that our people have experienced. They say it's the longest running litigation in the history of New Zealand, and it's sort of, there are still elements of it that need to be reviewed, such as, if you can see the last bullet point there, the Tongariro Power Scheme, which sees the taking of the headwaters for electricity generation. So although we have a river settlement, there are still sort of issues that will arise out of some of the things that are still happening on the river, but at least we have the settlement to help support us in bringing some of those things to conclusion. Here is a photo of our original claimants from the 1930s, who really were fundamental in ensuring that this particular issue around the Whanganui River and its ownership was before Parliament. More sort of recently, we have a claim lodged with the Waitangi Tribunal on behalf of our tribal entity, and then a report was released basically supporting all of the evidence that had been presented around our connection to the Whanganui River. Following that were negotiations with the New Zealand government until a deed of settlement was signed in 2014, which was then passed into law in 2017. And this was the date that this was the event where that particular deed of settlement was signed on the Whanganui River. So what the river settlement does is it acknowledges the special inalienable relationship between the river and its people. It recognises the effort to protect the river and provides for the health and well-being of both the people and the river. And it comes in 2 parts, which I will outline very, very briefly. The first part is around a new legal framework, Te Pā Aurua na Te Awa Tupua. And I think the point that seems to have been picked up throughout the world is the recognition of the river as a legal person. However, the most important thing for us is, as tribal people, are the intrinsic values adhered to and recognized, which we call tupua te kawe, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. Also, we have the human face, which speaks on behalf of the river. We have a strategy group consisting of those with river interests, who are also responsible for developing a strategy document for the river. And then we have the vesting of Crown-owned lands into the river itself, and funds for health and well-being initiatives being made available through the human face of the river. And here is a picture of one of the eel weirs, and we had many of them up and down the river. I mean, it was the petitions in the 1880s that sought to protect these. So firstly, if we talk about legal personality, what the settlement does is it provides for the river to be a living and indivisible whole. It recognises that. And it not only comprises the main stem of the river, but also all its tributaries from the mountains to the sea, and acknowledges all the physical and metaphysical elements of this particular river system. The point that Te Awa Tupua is a legal person is an important point. However, for our people of the river, the most important point really are the intrinsic values that underpin all decision making. And so here they are. We have 4 of them. The first is that the river is the source of spiritual and physical sustenance, which respects the spirituality that comes as part of being a river people, but also that stems from the river itself. The second value recognizes that the river is an indivisible and living whole. We can't have decisions being made upstream that will impact on those downstream. You have to take into consideration the whole living entity of the river, including physical and metaphysical elements in decision making. The third intrinsic value is around the inalienable connection between the people and the river, which is summarized there in ko au te awa ko te awa ko au, I am the river and the river is me. And finally, the fourth intrinsic value speaks to the work of all communities that have an interest in the river to work towards a common purpose and goal, and that is the health and well-being of the river and its people. We also have, as part of the settlement, a single role comprising of 2 persons, and their role is to be the face and voice for Te Awa Tupua. Their role is to uphold this new legal status, as well as the intrinsic values, to act and speak on behalf of the river, and to promote and protect its health and well-being. At present, we have Dame Tariana Turia and Tura Mahawira who fulfill this function. We also, as part of the settlement, have a strategy group, which consists of those that have interests in the river, which not only include the tribal nations, but also local authorities, government ministries, and others. Because at the end of the day, everyone who has an interest in the river is responsible for its health and well-being, not just the tribal nations. So it's a really important function and tool of this particular river settlement. They are responsible for developing, as I said earlier, the strategy document, which guides future environmental, cultural, social, and economic health and well-being for the river. And as part of their role, they must identify those issues, provide strategies, and recommend actions. Another element to this particular settlement was that where Crown-owned parts of the riverbed had been identified, then those are vested in the river itself, with the face and voice of the river exercising the landowner rights. So it's the first sort of time that the riverbed of the river in law has been where the riverbed of the river is vested in the river itself, and it's the first time that that's happened here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And finally, there is a contestable fund to support initiatives for the health and well-being of the river. It was known as the korotete, and there's a photo of one of those there that was used to house live eels. It's open to all groups and is there to also complement existing funding sources. So for us, this particular settlement is important. One, because it recognises those intrinsic values at law, and those are the things that will underpin decision-making for our river moving forward. Obviously, it recognises the tribal element of the settlement, and that iwi and hapu have a presence in the decision-making for Te Awatutua. Also, it looks at a whole lot of other things beyond just economic. It takes into account social, political, cultural, as well as an educational advancement of our people. But having a whole river catchment and whole river approach to the framework really does encourage all those that have interest in the river to work collaboratively for the health and well-being of the people as well as the river. And I think I'll sort of end there. Thank you, Mona, and pass back to you. Kia ora tātou.
Our next speaker is Austin Nunez. Thank you, Rawi.
My name is Austin Nunez, and I'm very pleased and honored to be here with all of you. As was mentioned earlier, our homelands, our ancestral lands are in the southwestern part of the Arizona, and also in Mexico. Our ancestral lands comprised of more than the 3 million acres that the Tohono O'odham Nation has today. In our particular community, we have 72,000 acres that we continue to call home. So I'm very grateful to Creator for allowing us to continue to be where he placed us. And Tohono means desert, O'odham means people. And we have always referred to ourselves as O'odham, the people. And in our particular case, our village name is Wa, referring to the water that used to flow in the river that we call arid. It would flow back into the ground, the riverbed, at the point where our forefathers settled. The surface flow was from the south to the north, and at that point, as I mentioned, it flowed back into the riverbed and then surfaced again about 8 miles northwest, where there was another O'odham settlement. So we have existed and survived since probably around the 1400s. Our ancestors are the Hohokam. The Hohokam means those who have gone, and they thrived in the area from 300 BC to about 1400 AD, and they built vast canals in the now Phoenix, city of Phoenix area, and then also in our area near my home place. And Sanibir is the term that is used due to the acceptance of the constitution that were provided to us, to most Indian nations back in the 1930s. Our people decided to go ahead and use that form of government, even though it was foreign to us. But nonetheless, we then became, instead of an independent community, we became part of the whole then Papago tribe of Arizona. And Papago is what the Spaniards called us for. I'm not real sure exactly how that came to be, but I think it was a combination of Spanish, English, all of them referring to the tepary bean that is native to our area that we grow. And so we have been, the Spaniards were the first European contact that we had. They came looking for gold. We didn't have it, but when they came upon us in our community at WAC. They found us to be a thriving, self-sufficient community, growing corn, squash, melons, and being very hospitable to them. We fed them, and then they moved on because, of course, as I mentioned, we didn't have any gold. So during the times that we didn't have the newcomers that are currently living around us, and prior to the Spanish contact, we have always been an agrarian community because of the water, and we settled there because of the water that was flowing. This water stream was probably only about a foot deep, and perhaps maybe 16 feet across, but it was actually also a marshland, and it was one of the biggest mesquite bosque in Arizona because of all the water, and the wildlife thrived. And we ourselves, as O'odham, when we planted, we prayed and sang songs, and then we began to go ahead and plant. And as we started putting the seeds into Mother Earth, we asked the seed to give us its bounty. So we were very respectful, knowing that, we are part of nature, we are part of the natural life cycle. And so when harvest time came around as well, we prayed and sang songs of gratitude to Creator, to then be able to enjoy the crops that we grew. And so as time went on after the Spaniards' contact, and it was mentioned earlier by Karina that the non-Indian settlers came to our area and started settling there, and started drilling wells to pump the aquifer. It was in the 1970s that we began to see the water levels drop for our wells, which were built by the Bureau of Indian Affairs back in the 1930s. And we needed to ensure that we had a good supply of water, not only for today, but for the future. And to have the federal government own up to its trust responsibility of providing for our health, education, and welfare, as they agreed to in taking the lands that they did in the United States. And so water is critical to surviving. So without it, we aren't able to use our lands for farming. So we filed a lawsuit against the United States in 1975, demanding that they restore the aquifer and provide us with a long-term water supply. Needless to say, that was a very challenging time with their neighboring city of Tucson, the county, the state, all the jurisdictions surrounding us, but also all the non-Indian water users that had their own personal wells. Nonetheless, with prayer, we went ahead and forged ahead, and our elders were very supportive of us to be sure to continue and make sure that we did everything possible to secure our inherent water rights. And so with their support and the prayers that we said in 23 years later, after the 1975 lawsuit was filed, we had an out of court settlement, as was mentioned. And that pipeline is actually 300 miles from the Colorado River through Phoenix, Tucson, and then to us. And so we're grateful again for that water supply. Our fields are thriving again, and we're growing our traditional crops. We're also growing commercial crops. And then in the process of having that water seep back into the ground because of the farming and because of the city of Tucson recharging what we call CAP water, which is Central Arizona Project, the project that is delivering the Colorado River to us, and the city of Phoenix and Tucson and everyone else in Southern Arizona, the city decided to replenish the aquifer by recharging it. And so with that and our own riparian restoration project that we developed next to the arid, the river, that water has been flowing back into the aquifer. So the riparian restoration was designed to restore the river area, what it used to look like. So cottonwood trees were planted, mesquite, and native shrubs. And it certainly does look like it used to, pretty much. And so we gathered there as community members to pray and then to teach our children about the necessity of protecting the water and to also preserve the water in their own homes and continue to have others come and visit us to see what can be done when you have water. And our elders had wanted the whole flow of the whole area of the river to be greened up like that, but they also wanted to see the river flow. And it was in 2017 that we got word from our hydrologist that the water has begun to flow. The river has begun to flow again, and it's for a short distance, maybe a quarter of a mile, about 8 inches deep, 10 feet wide. Nonetheless, it is water, and it was so remarkable. And we shed tears of joy and thank Creator again for answering our prayers. And we held a community celebration to include the women folk who used to carry water from the river to their homes using these oyas on top of their heads. And they all walked over there from the community to the river like that, and then got water. Afterwards, blessed by the medicine men and blessed everybody. And then they took the water home to their families. And the medicine man told us, drink some. And I was a little hesitant, but I drank it and it tasted so good. And so I use that water to bless my family, to bless others. And when I'm asked to offer prayers, I sometimes use that water. So we're ever so grateful that we've been blessed to restore the river a little, as I mentioned, and in that our neighbors are also wanting to engage us in their discussions about preserving water in the Southwest Desert. And it's been very remarkable that, there are individuals who support us and have the same thought. They also would like to see their areas, like in the city of Tucson, have the river restored and flowing. And they have done that, but it's with reclaimed water. Nonetheless, it does let the plant life thrive, and all the insects and the animals are able to use that water. I forgot to mention that in our stretch of the river, that fish came back. There is a native fish. It's very small. It's only like a half inch, and it was just amazing that that happened. And so it's just really remarkable. So we continue to talk to our children about what can happen with prayer, and then the need to be able to continue to respect all of nature and to help it thrive as best as they are able to, we are able to. And so I mentioned that we've always had individual family plots in the beginning, but we had to form a cooperative, and this cooperative is known as the Seminary Cooperative Association, and it now manages all the farmlands in our community. And we have a board that manages that, and they purposely agreed not to use any pesticides. So these crops are grown without the pesticides, and we definitely do not want GMO type plants to infiltrate our native crops. And it's just, again, because of the water, we're able to have these crops that we have. And in other parts of our Tohono O'odham Nation, where there is no flowing water, there is a ceremony called the rain bringing ceremony. And what is used is the saguaro fruit, which needs rain to grow. And so we use that fruit to make syrups, jams, and then also just to eat it as we gather it. And we, of course, have prayer before we actually gather the fruit. And when we get the syrup, we then ferment it into a ceremonial wine, and then we have a 4-day ceremony to call the rains. And so even, with all of that, we knew that we were part of the natural cycle of life, and we depended on the rains to sustain us. And so in other parts of our Tohono O'odham Nation, when the rains came, which was usually after 4 days after the ceremony was over, they then diverted the water from the mountains to the fields in the desert, and that's how they grew their crops. And so there's a what's known as an autumn corn that only needs 60 days to grow, and which is a very short time. So we can go ahead and use the corn. With climate change today, we realize, our people are saying that, we're being told by Creator to really, really live by, our ancestral teachings, and to do more to conserve water, to only take what you need to survive, and to enhance nature however it is that you can do so. So we are looking at building gabions in our whole 72,000 acres to have the rainflow and the floodwaters seep back into the aquifer, and then be able to have all of our homes be on solar, and not so much with wind, but the solar, we have lots of sunshine. So that's something that we have begun to do with our businesses or commercial buildings. And there are some homes with it, but we need to continue to do more. And we realize too that the Colorado River needs to be protected. I always pray for good snowpacks in the Colorado mountains so it can provide the water for everyone along the river. And there are so many people and jurisdictions, municipalities that count on this Colorado River water today in certainly Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and California. So with climate change, the supply is threatened. And we realized in our community that the water is being imported, but we continue to pray that we will still have a guaranteed water supply. We do have the ability to access 10,000 acre feet of groundwater. So that is also very helpful. And the water that is supplied to us is only good for farming. It's not potable water. However, we can, when we choose to down the road, convert it to potable water. So that is the story of my community. And I believe that's all I would like to say at this point. Thank you, Mona, for asking me to be on this panel, and thank you all for your kind attention.
I'd like to introduce to you now Betty Lyons.
Thank you, Mona. Niwahaskiano, my original name is Dainhia'a, as Karena said, and that means small sky, and I'm a proud citizen of the Onondaga Nation Snipe Clan. And we are matrilineal. My oldest son, hold on just a second. My screen flipped on me. Sorry, I apologize. My oldest son's name is Onegano, meaning cold water, and my youngest son's name is Deha Huwakwa, which means he lifts up the canoe. And as I said, we are matrilineal, and that should give you an idea of our connection to water and all living beings. We are located in what is now known as New York State, about 20 miles south of Syracuse, but our traditional homelands encompass Syracuse in a far greater area. This first slide I'm showing, we are part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. and which was founded on the shores of Onondaga Lake, where the peacemaker came over 1,000 years ago. And the peacemaker brought together our 5 warring nations, the Mohawks from your left to right, Mohawks, the Cayugas, the Onondagas, the Senecas, and the Oneidas, and the Tuscarora Nation joined later our confederacy in 1720. Our nation accepted this message of peace, and they came together and agreed to work collectively and peacefully under the great white pine, which was on the lake. This message brought a democratic system of government and is led by a grand council consisting of the chiefs from all nations. And it's carried on today. They meet, well, before the pandemic, they were meeting roughly once a month. And our women still choose our leadership. And only one title is chosen by the chiefs, and that is our Tadadahu, who is in this picture that you're looking at right now. And this system only works when we are in proper relationship with all living beings. And the reason it should be important to everyone else is that Onondaga Lake is the birthplace of democracy. For the United States, they patterned their government after the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, but unfortunately they left out the rights of nature and the rights of women. The US gave our Confederacy credit in both houses in Resolution 331 in October of 1988. Next slide. My ancestors lived on the lake. This is a map of what the lake looked like before the waterways were displaced and moved and changed. And Onondaga Lake was once surrounded by a diversity of wetlands and upland habitats. And my ancestors lived on this lake during different times throughout the year to collect medicinal plants, food, all of that. You know, we kind of moved around. There was an abundance of wildlife, fish such as eels and whitefish, which are no longer present, berries and medicinal plants. And it also had a very high saline content. Catherine Landis, a PhD, did so much work to show what the lake was before pre-contact. And this first slide, this is what the Europeans came to and how it looked. There were cedar swamps, red maples, and beautiful forests filled the low ground surrounding the lake, punctuated by openings where inland salt marshes grew around saline springs. We had wild rice, bulrush, cattail, and arrowhead extended into the shallow lake waters to form emergent wetlands. Around the lake grew orchards and feather mosses. So there were fruit trees, they called them buttonbush, buttonwood, butternut, and walking fern and royal fern, all within walking distance of each other. They didn't have to go for sugar maple, which we give thanks for and have a ceremony for once a year. Basswood, chestnut oak, black cherry, and they cover the surrounding hills. And these are just the trees. There's not enough time for me to list all the fish, birds, and medicinal plants that are no longer there. This slide I wanted to show you is, I'll wait for him to get there, sorry. Next slide, Tim. Thank you. Sorry about that. This next slide, you know, kind of shows, as you look around it, all the different waste beds, the Salina landfill, the Lower Lake Creek. And I wanted to just kind of give you an indication of the close proximity to all of these different waste beds and where this contamination is on the lake. The contamination began on Onondaga Lake after it was illegally taken from our nation after the Revolutionary War. And the production of salt began in 1797. One of the companies responsible for this pollution was Solvay Processed Gear, now known as Honeywell. And they produced 20 tons of soda ash per day, and the byproducts were dumped back into the lake. Next slide. I want to show you in black and white, literally, where all of these different waste beds are, so that you can get an idea of the mass contamination that's on our sacred lake. So by 1950, there also began mercury and chlorine production, and the remnants of which were also dumped into the lake like their soda ash counterparts. And it was estimated that this happened at a rate of up to 25 pounds a day, and were responsible for discharging 165,000 pounds of mercury into the southwest portion of the lake due to the mass production of chlorine over the course of 30 plus years. Next slide. This is what the lake currently looks like, and you can see just with your own eyes not only the shimmer of the mercury, the gray, that gray dead look of the mercury, but you can see how all the soda ash from all of those waste beds right along the shoreline, those white, the white outer layer that's going around the lake. And every time it rains, all of that leaches back into the lake. Currently, there are 7 million cubic yards of soil contaminated with methyl mercury, which is the most dangerous form of mercury, and it remains at the bottom of our sacred lake. And the contamination has bioaccumulated in fish, plants, wildlife that inhabit the lake. And we as Onondaga peoples can no longer fish there, collect the medicinal plants, and have been physically removed from having any relationship with the lake and all of our relatives that inhabit her. Next slide, please. This is a 60-foot cliff of waste beds of soda ash were built up within the southwest part of the lake. And on this exact location of this picture now stands today an amphitheater. And people come, and there are no warning signs to the public to let them know that their health could be at risk. You're not even allowed to touch the soil. Trees don't even live more than 2 years on this lake, because once they deeply root into the soil, they become contaminated and then they die off. So the Department of Health finally did a study, because we have a large, and I don't like this word, a migrant population of people that came to relocate in Syracuse, New York, that fish and eat out of this lake is their traditional practice. They're Bhutanese, Burmese, and they come here with the expectation that the lake is clean. So they studied men and women ages 18 to 50 only. That was their study group. And it was determined their mercury level is 4 times higher than the average person, as they were eating about 40 meals a month from the lake. And it took our organization, the American Indian Law Alliance, 10 years to get signs placed on the lake in their languages to warn them of the dangers of eating the fish, which I find absolutely egregious. Next slide, please. We as Indigenous peoples, have a responsibility to speak for all living beings that can't speak for themselves. That is just a mandate that we all carry, that I think all Indigenous people carry. Hold on one second, my screen is fluttering. Give me 1 minute. To look out, for anyone that comes into our homelands, this is a charge that we take very seriously. And so that is part of why we had the signs done. It was so important for us to make sure that people understood what had happened to this lake and that it was no longer safe. And so this crazy notion with climate change that we can just move to another planet is absolutely absurd. And we all need to protect and honor our mother, the earth. And there's no remediation for water once it's contaminated. And so my question to our non-Indigenous sisters and brothers that don't get, what we're trying to say is, where are your ethics, morals, compassion, common sense, and integrity? And as Karena said, Lyons, who is from our nation, always says, we need a value system change for our survival. And it's not just our survival, it's all living beings that inhabit Mother Earth. So the one takeaway from this presentation is, that I want to convey is that everything is connected, and that we all have a responsibility to each other as human beings, and, as we are all relatives. I guess, I always go back to something my Aunt Tanya would always say, is that we are all, you know, all living beings, that we're all relatives, and they're not resources. They're not commodities. They're not there to be bought, sold, and traded. And it is time that we regain a presence at our sacred lake in order to look after it. We have such a strong spiritual connection to our sacred lake to have ceremonies that would be such a healing for our people, and to reconnect with our relatives that call this sacred lake home. And so we continue to push Onondaga County, the county executive, and Onondaga County legislators, you know, to, it's funny how they took our name, right? Onondaga County, they appropriated our name to give us a piece of our lake back. It's so important to do this. This picture was taken when we had a wooden lacrosse festival on this lake, and we were allowed to have, you know, some social dances there and some demonstrations there for folks, but our connection runs deep. You know, I think that with all of the other speakers, how important water is to all of us, and how important our own mandate is to protect it. And I want to thank all of you for listening, and I appreciate your time today. Miwaha.
Thank you. Thank you, Betty. Thank you for being present and sharing the matter about the Onondaga Lake, and also to each of the other speakers, Rawidi and Austin Nunez. Thank you for your sharing of your the work and the efforts that your people have persevered in acquiring the your rights, the rights of the indigenous people of your home places, and this has been an ongoing effort for indigenous people, and in terms of how we as indigenous people have been called to by our own people to step forward. And in our teachings, many times we've been told that this time would come. This time would come when we would need to be willing to step forward, that we would be the reminders to the others who have forgotten about their relationship with life on Mother Earth. And so thank you for sharing. And we're going to go ahead and move into what I call the traditional dialogue. And in the traditional dialogue, the participants of the dialogue are our speakers. And this doesn't happen very often. As a matter of fact, this is the first time that we're bringing together the speakers who have shared with you. And in hearing what has been presented, we can see that there are many similarities in how the foundations of their efforts were based on their value systems, their instructions in the relationship that we have with life on Earth. And so there were those similarities that they shared. And then also a consideration is that there were these time frames for doing this work. 100, about 123 years for the Maori people, and then around 23 years for the Tohono O'odham people, and for the Onondaga Lake, this is an ongoing effort. And I think that presenting these cases gives our participants an outlook on what our indigenous people have been striving for, and also to hopefully understand what we mean when we say water is life. I've had someone ask me, why is water so important? And I couldn't believe that person was asking me such a question. But I said, I'll tell you what, leave your home and go up into the mountains or somewhere far away from the city and all conveniences, and be there for 4 days without water, without food. When you're through with that time there, come back and ask me that question. It is such a basic, it's a basic need that we have, that there should not be any question that water is life. And so I'm like to move into this traditional dialogue, which would be among you. There may have been certain things that you heard from the other presenters that you would like to address or contribute to in some way, or even share some particular teaching that goes along with what was shared in the presentations. So I'd like to introduce that. And then for the audience, in the traditional dialogue, the dialogue is just between the presenters, and then there are no questions and answers period for the audience. It's time for you to listen and to reflect. And the way that I was told by my elders was that the way we learn is to reflect on these questions. What did you hear? What did you see? What did you think? How do you feel? Reflect on that from what is shared here in this traditional dialogue. And so from there, it is the intention that we learn. So I'd like to open this up now for traditional dialogue. And I just want to also mention that there were some things that jumped out at me. One was Rawiri, you talked about, from the mountains, or from the ridge to the reef, from the tops of the mountains all the way into the ocean, into the waters. How that's all included in the care of our water systems. It's a whole system, it's a whole cycle, and it's not separate. And one thing I'd like to add to that is that also consideration of our aquifers included in that. That should always be included, is the aquifers or the subterranean waters. And in regard to Austin Nunez, when you talked about the return of the river flow, that there was growth of vegetation again and the return of fish. And that's regeneration. And I think it's important that this be something that's highlighted, that sometimes people get hopeless, but this represents the hope, and that there is regeneration. And the other understanding is that Mother Earth, she's the one that's powerful and is going to do that regeneration, but she needs help to slow down the process of the degradation that's occurring to her. And so and Betty, you're talking about how the concern is not just for the Indigenous nations, but also for all. And as someone said to me the other day, we are all Indigenous. And it's interesting, though, that there are the certain Indigenous people that have taken that responsibility to step forward and to be that reminder. So those are just the comments I wanted to make right now. So let's go ahead and move into the dialogue. Do any of you want to go ahead and start?
I wanted to, I would like to hear a little bit more about, you know, Raweri, where you come from, and the outside, like from both you and Austin, I guess, you know, during now that we are facing all of these multiple pandemics, right? Coronavirus, climate change, pollution in our waterways, people trying to push in these pipelines, food insecurity. Have either of you noticed that there is a shift outside of your community? Like I call them border towns or border places, right? That kind of abut your communities, where they're getting more involved. I mean, you know, like I guess how I'm thinking of it is, you know, as something that Warren is always saying, there has to be that value system change for our survival. Mother Earth can, you know, live without us. We can't live without her. And so, you know, have you noticed that shift yet? And how much education do you all feel you have to do? You know, because I always feel like somehow it's like put on us to have to educate, right? With something that seems like it should come natural.
I'd like to respond. Yes, there has been a shift in thinking from our neighboring communities about conserving water, about taking care of Mother Earth. And as I mentioned earlier, that you know, we've been asked to be at the table to discuss ways of conserving and enhancing the well, it's the English term is Santa Cruz River, but as I mentioned, it's arid. And they are actually wanting more of our crops that we grow, again, because we don't use pesticides. And so they're even wanting, there in some cases, we do have the seeds as well. So we sell those to our non-Indian neighbors and teach them, you know, how to care for them. And then even with how to prepare and cook the traditional foods. The farm has developed a cookbook to show them how to use the crops that we grow. And then the riparian restoration site that we have, it's about 20 acres and it's very lush compared to everything else around. We've had education, I guess educational groups come in, or people who are environmentally sound-minded individuals and want to see how we develop that. And through that, you know, we believe that we're educating them about how to, again, be more aware that in the desert environment, water is survival, water is key. But once you have water, everything blossoms, everything blooms as it has been. So that's what I've noticed. And then south of us, there was a major pecan farm. They've since decided not to grow any more pecans, but they themselves developed a master plan to conserve water and to also slow the flow in the river to hopefully get that flowing in that particular area. So that was amazing because they were one of our adversaries in the very beginning, and now we're best of friends, and you know, we have a good relationship. So just wanted to mention those things.
Kia ora. Yeah, just from our sort of part of the world, I agree that, you know, there's this sort of, it's almost as if we need this ongoing education program around our intrinsic values. And yes, we have seen some change, but change is slow. And, you know, when we look at some of our local authorities, territorial authorities, you know, it just takes one key person in there to move on, and then we sort of have to start again. So having a program that is led by our people, that educates them about our framework, that educates them about the intrinsic values is really, really important. But we also need that particular education for some of our own people who have moved away, who are no longer connected to our river and river system as their ancestors once were. So there's sort of like a whole of community approach that is required to help everybody grow their understanding of what it means to be a good custodian of the river, of the entire river system, and the work that is required to enhance its health and well-being.
That's wonderful. I'm glad to hear it, because here, unfortunately, you know, both of you are enjoying some shift changes, right? And I don't think that that has quite happened here yet, because there's such an abundance of fresh water. Like we have access to the most fresh water in the entire US. And so, you know, I think that people take it for granted, and they're like, oh, you know, who cares if that lake is polluted? You know, they don't want to spend the money to remediate it or to even make it cleaner. They're even proposing to put a beach there. And so, you know, the education process has been slow in coming. We do work with neighbors of the Onondaga Nation, some really great, you know, great folks there that help us, Cindy Scalacci, Jack Mano, you know, Sue Eyeholzer and her husband, Paul, like, and Hillary, like we just, they're non-Indigenous people that have committed themselves to helping to get this message out. But it's like, it almost seems like we need to form an Indigenous coalition, if you will, right, throughout the world to try to bring up all of the issues that all of our different nations are experiencing.
Rawiri, I wanted to comment on your presentation and the fact that your nation, your people have given the river personhood. I really, really commend you all for doing that, and the time that it took for that to occur. I'm glad it happened. And with that in mind, I'm kind of at least thinking maybe we should do something similar with the river in our area, even though it's just a small flow. But I think that it would be so meaningful for everyone that lives in the region if we could do something similar. There is, you know, as Native people, we realize that everything that Creator provided to us has a spirit. The water has a spirit, land has a spirit, the plants, the animals. And so it's really one plant for us is the saguaro that I mentioned earlier. It's a huge columnar cactus that has arms. And in working with the Healing the Border project, that is a faith-based group using prayer as a means of getting the wall that the former administration was constructing to stop them from further constructing that wall, but also to have everyone become aware of the environmental degradation that occurs and has occurred along the border wall. And in our case, again, there is a sacred spring that was threatened that's right on the border. Fortunately, it's at the level of that spring has risen up again. So again, my thought is that our prayers have worked. And but in the process, they destroyed so many of our saguaros, and including one burial site. So of course, we took the federal government to task on those, and you know, there is really no way to remediate that for the reburial. However, we said our prayers and asked for forgiveness from our ancestors for the way that they were treated, and we're doing what we can to you know, protect that for the future. But the saguaros themselves, we've always regarded them as people because of the abundance of their fruit that they provided to us. And for the fact that we use that fruit for our sacred rain-bringing ceremony. So we haven't quite gotten to the point where we legally have claimed saguaro as personhood, although our tribal government did pass a resolution stating the need to protect the saguaro, and not only for us on the reservation, but off the reservation, anywhere the saguaro grows in southern Arizona. So there are non-Indian people who support that whole notion, that idea. And as it is, the state of Arizona, their state flower is the saguaro blossom. So it seemed to me that everybody should jump on the bandwagon to support us in that regard. So I just wanted to mention that. So again, thank you, Riri, and also Betty, with regard to the lake there. It's just unfathomable to me that people don't want to clean it up. And you know, I will certainly pray that things change and that you can get the lake cleaned up somehow, some way. So I appreciate both of you for your good work that you're doing, and certainly be keeping all of you in my prayers. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you all if you have participated in any of the United Nations World Forum on Indigenous Peoples issues in regard to water issues. This is the UN decade for water, and right now it's at the midpoint of the decade. And if you have, what has been your experience? Do you feel like it's effective in moving forward issues? And also, if there is any recommendations that you would like to bring forward.
I think it's something that we should all be working toward for sure, and lift up our voice. The UN is a slow moving entity, but you know, small incremental steps are important. And I love also something that Austin brought up about, you know, Rawiri, and how you now see this river as a person and giving that status. And I think that if all waterways were given a status of that they were our relatives and not merely resources, right? And that they had rights that are, they should have the same rights that everyone should have, right? Just because they can't speak for themselves. And so I guess that would be my recommendation, you know, to put forward, that we could possibly add something to that conversation going forward.
Okay.
Yes, I definitely agree with you, Betty. And myself, I've not had any experience in being in any of those forums that you mentioned, Mona. So I leave it to the rest of you. But you know, I know that Indigenous people have made some headway with some of the issues that have been brought forth to those forums. So I'm grateful to all those who have been involved and will continue to be involved. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, I sort of, my involvement has been, there hasn't really been any, apart from some of the work that I've done with you, Mona. But I think, you know, just sort of listening from our other presenters today, you know, the importance of regeneration, of course. You know, and I think about, you know, that small native fish, Austin, that you talked about. And, we're in the same boat here. We've got, massive challenges ahead of us in terms of our own native fish species. And, what are we doing? What are we doing to ensure that they survive beyond, the next couple of generations? And I think it's wonderful to hear the work that's happening in your part. We're doing the same sort of thing with our kids, so that they have an appreciation of the things that make up the river system, which is, more than just water, but it's all those that draw life from it. So, if there's sort of a recommendation around that, Mona, that can be written around restoration of the health and well-being of all those things that draw life from our waters, I think that might be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Mona, I wanted to add something really quick too, something that it just came to me. When we got our names, our Ungwihoi names, our original names, in our longhouse, we're instructed that, all of the plants and animals medicinals will know who we are when we need help, right? So my question to everyone is, how will they know us if they're sick and unwell? If they're living in contamination, if the waters aren't well, how can we expect help from all of the plants, animals, medicinals, water, air, to come and aid us when we're doing these things, right? To be mindful of that, because as I said again, we need all of those things. Relationship should be reciprocal. Regenerative and reciprocal, not one where we're just constantly taking.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me of my one of my elder teachers, my Hopi elder, Thomas Banyaka, who had said that it was important for us to know where is our clean water source, where is the clean air, where do we find all of the plant life that is part of our survival, including the medicine. And know your fire. And knowing the fire was to be able to understand that there's a sacred fire, that there is a sacred fire that is not man-made, that's not lit with a match or a lighter, but is lit with the flint stone, which is so powerful and sacred. And so I was told that these were part of our basic foundations of survival. And I believe that's what our Indigenous people have consistently upheld. Although, of course, there's been areas or sometimes people who have forgotten about it. I don't like to use that word forgotten, because we have memory, and memory never leaves us. And so we even have genetic memory, which many times we just don't pay attention to. And so part of this, the dialogue that we're having here and the presentations that were made are part of that reminder about and awakening the memory that we have within us, regardless of, what nations we come from, and that we are all related, we are all one, and that what happens to one happens to all. And so the other part of it is that is the teaching that our ancestors, they took care of our home, this home. They took care of Mother Earth. so that they could pass it on to the coming generations. The future generations, they said, the ones they will not see. And we are those generations. And now it's incumbent upon us to uphold that moral responsibility, that responsibility to take care of life as they did on Mother Earth. All over the world, there are Indigenous people like us who have never left their home. They have consistently stayed where we say the Creator put us. And so we've consistently had that relationship. And consistently, we've maintained the relationship with all of the food that we use, the medicines, the waters. We maintain that relationship, and we have this sacred responsibility, moral responsibility, to pass it on to the coming generations, the ones we will not see. So, and if you look around at Mother Earth, we have the lands that are under our care, and much of the biodiversity has remained intact. And that's our effort again here today, to continue to maintain what little we have, so that there's going to be something there for our future generations. And so I just wanted to add that to this conversation. Is there anyone else that has something to say? Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and conclude our dialogue now, and I'm looking forward to another time when we can come together. We can perhaps add more to what we've shared today, and maybe there'll be others that will be joining us. We have intentions to include dialogue with Indigenous people globally, and in order to bring awareness and education to those who have that interest and are possibly our allies in this work, in protecting Mother Earth, protecting the water, the air, protecting our livelihood for the coming generations, and also to feel empowered that you as a individual have that responsibility to even start within your own little circle and acknowledge the water, know where it is, know what's happening to it, and understand that the impacts that may be occurring or planned, so that you might be able to be an advocate for the protection of the water, not only for us human beings, but all of life on Mother Earth. And I'd like to go ahead and turn this over to Karena Gore to make some comments.
Thank you so much, Mona, and thank you to all of the presenters. I know I'm not alone in feeling deeply moved and in a time of reflection on what has been shared here, what has been said. I want to give my thanks for, as Mona said, awakening the memory within each of us. I think that we can feel that. I am here on the ancestral land of the Lenape and near a living body of water that they called the Mahicantuck, the river that flows both ways, which is known as the Hudson River. Just want to share that has been brought into my awareness in a new way during this time, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful that we're able to be in our places, feeling more connected to the water in our places, and yet also meeting in this cyberspace, in this internet place. And that you all have not only shared in this space, but you've given us permission to record it so that we might share it with others who weren't able to be here. And so it strikes me that in this way, we're actually through the grounding that you all have, we're able to use time and space in a different way. And yet it's in service of original instructions, of returning to original instructions, which, as Mona has taught us, is ethics. Ethics is a way to do that. And so I just want to close by saying thank you very much. Thank you especially to Mona for bringing this. This has been your vision, your prayer, and we know that there is more to come, and we are behind you in facilitating and supporting this work. So thank you very much, and back to you, Mona.
Thank you so much. Thank you to each and every one of you who've joined us today, taking time out from your everyday life. And at this time, we're going to have a closing song from our panelist, Austin Nunez of the Tohono O'odham Nation.
Thank you, Mona. This song is in O'odham, and it's in appreciation of the water. Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Yani hayo inu yana heine yoe. Jesus good Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Yani hayo inu yana heine yoa. Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Yani hayo inu yana heine yoe. Jesus good Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yani hayo inu yana heine. Shudak yani hayo inu yana heine. Yani hayo inu yana heine yoe. Have a blessed day.
Escalate, 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 escalate. Blessings to each and every one of you as you move forward in this day. May your waters be blessed.
Oh.